You have arrived at Laughbox, the podcast for the Association of Applied and Therapeutic Humor. We are so excited you're here. Join us for episode 132 with Jim Bob Williams, Katie B, and Shelia Kennison, the neuroscientist extraordinaire. Yay!
Welcome to Laughbox, the official podcast of the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor. I'm Jim Bob Williams.
And I'm Katie B.
And today we have someone who's smarter than both of us put together and squared. We're talking with Dr. Shelia Kennison, the author of The Cognitive Neuroscience of Humor, which is a fantastic book. It took me a year and a half to read it. So welcome, Dr. Kennison.
Thank you so much for that great introduction and an endorsement of the book. I think it took me about that long to write it.
All right. So I understand you grew up in West Virginia.
I did. I think I just looked you up, and I grew up maybe an hour and a half east of where you are now.
That's right. I'm in St. Albans, West Virginia. For those of you who aren't familiar with Virginia geography, I'm midway between Huntington and Charleston.
Yeah, so I grew up always having to go to Charleston for the important things, and I was raised in the county to the east in Fayette County.
All right, phenomenal. Before I get any further, tell us a little bit about yourself and why humor?
That's a great question. I think it wasn't a direct route. I go to college and grad school and end up being in the professor business and studying psychology from the cognitive science point of view. So how does the mind work? That's really what fascinated me. And all along the years, I would work with students, and I focused on research that students were interested in and trying to get them hooked on cognitive science. And that's tough. Many feel it's a boring science because it's so abstract. And how do you study the mind? It's intangible. And so after tenure, that big hump where you feel like I have some security now, I began to think, what would I enjoy researching more than what I'm researching before? And humor became the topic that I discovered, hey, you can research it and publish studies on humor. And students found it super interesting. So I just started slowly, hey, what would be fun to look at? And the idea for the book really, I think, was at that point where I'm thinking, what would be fun to read about and write about and learn about so that I could be informed for these future studies. And so The Cognitive Neuroscience of Humor was that book. And boy, it was quite tough to complete. It focuses a lot on brain studies. And as you get into the book, you'll see it's quite a mystery how it is our brain achieves the humor comprehension and creating laughter and creating smiling. It's not the case that we have one brain area responsible for humor, but we have many brain areas. And I've listened to some of your past podcasts, and I found that I resonated with many of your guests in that it was during a very difficult time in my life when I realized how much humor was important. And in my 20s in grad school, I had thyroid cancer. And so that was a huge life transition. And I do feel like there were times when I felt, thank goodness for those slapstick, corny, funny movies. Critics may not see them as great art, but I think those kinds of experiences got me through that very difficult time.
Wow, Shelia, thanks for being alive today.
You're welcome.
And for all you do, because it's the deeper we get into the cognitive parts of the brain, cognitive reasons and parts of the brain, right? For humor, the more we can understand all the benefits.
Yes, and there are so many benefits that hardcore scientists have started to document. I feel that when I teach my Psych of Humor class to undergrads, they really are surprised. And I think most scientists in other fields would be surprised how strong the scientific literature is on these effects of humor. For example, some of the studies that are most impressive to me look at even things like blood glucose for type 2 diabetics, that after you experience humor following a meal, you do find you can measure significant drops in blood glucose, which would be a good thing health-wise for those with type 2 diabetes. The reductions of cortisol, the human stress hormone, these are quite well established with a long history. I do think the effects of elevated mood and more positive outlook, those most people would accept those as, oh, of course. But when you're measuring biomarkers from your blood and from your saliva, I think, and urine as well, the everyday person is going to be like, wow, I really had no idea.
That was the amazing part of your book, was there were things that I had heard other people mention, but I'd never seen it documented and referenced so thoroughly. I must say, when I make a presentation and someone asks, what's the proof behind that? What's the proof behind cortisol being decreased? What's the proof of that? I said, Dr. Kennison has brought the receipts and they're here. It takes people from this, I'm not sure that's really science, to, oh, that's peer-reviewed, published material. This is not just wishful thinking.
I was impressed when I sat down to try to write the book. I really did, going into it, have no idea how much research is out there to review. And so I myself was quite impressed, especially with the number of randomized clinical trials that have already been done, showing that you use that state-of-the-art technique to randomly assign people to get a treatment or get a placebo or some sort of experimental control. And when they come into the study, nobody knows who's going to be in the experimental or control group. So that state-of-the-art technique that we use in medicine for drugs and new surgeries and whatnot, we find that the benefits of humor can be measured. They're significant even in those designs. So I do think, relatively compared to other areas in social science and brain science, there are few studies on humor when you compare it to what else is out there being studied. So there's a huge opportunity for scientists in the future to start doing more of this research, especially in the randomized controlled trials. I do think we will be able to find more benefits if we look. So scientists themselves who could be studying humor might also think, oh, that can't be. It can't be that these biomarkers are affected by relatively brief, or maybe a brief session over 6 months, once a week, can lead to these pretty stable effects that are in the positive direction.
Fascinating to hear that you teach a class on the psychology of humor. I have to enroll at Oklahoma State in order to be able to take the class, or is there a way to audit this?
There's no way to do it without enrolling, but the textbook that I use is probably the one that's the only one to really go to would be The Psychology of Humor by Rod Martin and Thomas Ford, 2018. It's a great introduction to the topic.
So how many fellow scientists are there out there that are dedicating a significant portion of their research to humor?
In numbers, I would think it's probably under 100. There's a couple annual conferences, and it's totally not crowded. If everyone probably knows everyone. But then there's the journal, the academic journal Humor, where most of the work, at least the important work, would be coming out.
I'm super interested. This is your latest book, and you're talking about, it sounds like you worked in linguistics before.
I did, and my previous books were on language. One, the introduction to language development, and then psychology of language, which was really my core focus in grad school. And even as a child, I think growing up in West Virginia, we were surrounded by beautiful forests and nature. So I love language and I love science, understanding nature through science. And so when I got to college, I majored in linguistics because it was the scientific study of language. And so that does inform everything I do.
If I may digress for just a second, I was on a bus with a bunch of Gregorian chanters who were all PhDs in Spain, and they were from everywhere. And I remember standing on that bus thinking, I want a PhD in linguistics, because this is the most interesting bunch of people dealing with all these languages from back in the day. But I don't want to digress too far. I wanted to just share that with you because I'm fascinated by language. I collect languages, to say thank you to people in their own language and things like
Oh,
that.
how
And
many-
I used to be able to say help in 15 languages. I think I can say thank you in about 10 or more. I haven't tried in a while. I used to have it like lined up in my mind, but it's been a while since I've practiced that. But I compare. Here's a fun example linguistically. And to say thank you in Arabic is shukran. To say thank you in somebody, it might be Indonesia, I can't exactly remember, is salam. And to say thank you in Ethiopian is amasaganalo. And somehow my brain takes salam, turns it around, and places it within alaikum salam or walaikum or the greeting in Arabic, and it puts it all together into this thank you in Ethiopian that I can somehow remember.
One of my interests was the idea of some humor is very much integrated into the language, like puns.
Right.
And so when I teach my class, we talk about who likes puns and who doesn't like puns. And I thought of myself as somebody that did not really appreciate the pun. But I have to say that when I do try to accumulate these sample jokes, puns are a core aspect of the humor that we use for joke interactions. But when you look at bilingual people and the jokes that may be available, often they do involve the linguistic aspects of the language. So you can make a turn of phrase and involving two languages if you know both of those languages and the listener also does. There's very little work on that because it requires bilingual researchers and bilingual subjects and a careful attention to words.
No one has studied Spanglish or Franglish.
In terms of humor, I think the one paper that has looked at bilingual humor from a cognitive point of view, they might have included that, but I don't think there's been very much at all.
Interesting. So let's go back to this book. And I'm curious about the human development side and the humor in what you studied in autistic folks.
Yeah, I do think this one is something that is fascinating. The interest in autism spectrum disorders is very high right now. And there are a few research studies showing, one, there may be some reduced appreciation of humor in some people with autism spectrum disorders. But a really recent study by Sophie Scott and colleagues found that if you told these dad jokes in the context of a laugh track that we might be familiar with from TV shows, that the laugh track actually for some people with autism spectrum disorders increased the appreciation of that joke, those corny jokes. So it was a very optimistic finding that even if you have autism spectrum disorders, that you could still appreciate humor to some degree, and it can be increased with some environmental cues.
Would
Oh,
that be
is
coming
fascinating.
from, sorry, Jim Bob, one more thing. Would that be
Yeah,
coming
go ahead.
from the contagion of laughter?
I believe so. This idea that we react to each other like in yawning and body posture and smiling. And so hearing others laugh triggers off these associations in our mind. Oh, like you're on the lookout for that funny thing. And that this is even happening in people that we might have thought would not have it as strongly. So the autism spectrum disorder and contagion seems to be compatible.
That's phenomenal. All right, I'm speaking as a grandfather of an autistic child, actually a grandfather of an autistic bilingual child who
What
has recently started discovering humor. And it's been an amazing journey because he's recently he's shown a flair for performance that he can get people to respond by humor. And some, granted, these are 8-year-old level jokes, so let's not.
right.
I don't think any professional comedians who are in any trouble yet, but I'd say watch out in about 12 years. Okay.
I would
And
also
so,
say that recently some famous comedians have come out to say that they are on the spectrum. And so that also supports the idea that humor and being on the spectrum are not incompatible.
I tested on the spectrum. I was a little
How long
shocked
ago?
by that.
How long ago did you get evaluated or?
I just took all the tests online. I don't know where to get evaluated, but yeah, about 6 months ago or so.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, do you feel like it changed or informed anything, or was it just, oh, that's interesting?
Oh, it definitely informed some social anxiety. I always felt like I was different than everybody else.
Yeah, I think our culture is seeing this boom of awareness about all sorts of neurodivergent conditions. And I do think the idea that many people had these all along and we just
Yeah.
didn't know to look is valid. And that in some ways it can not necessarily have to lead to some sort of medicalization of the situation, but just enriching people's lives, knowing, oh, that thing that's different about me is maybe part of this, but it's really not a big deal.
Yeah. And are you familiar with the book? Is it Neurotribes?
Yes, one of my favorites.
Okay.
Can you talk about that in relation to your work?
Sure, I think I taught a class recently on neurodivergence for freshmen honor students, and I was really surprised how embracing the generation is now compared to when I was in college. I think everybody knows, everybody understands, everybody's got someone in their family with some form of neuro. And as a cognitive scientist, I was trained back in the 90s. Um, with this philosophy and science that everybody's brain is basically fundamentally the same.
Mm.
So when we study the mind, traditionally, there's that sort of idea that whatever processes are carried out, it's going to be invariant, same for everybody. But even as a student, I felt like understanding the biology just a tiny bit, that could not be possible. That especially in the work of brain damage individuals, people who sustain TBIs through car accidents or disease, the brain becomes different. And so we need to understand processing from an individual differences point of view. And so I do think science is catching up in that area, but it's hard to get away from the idea that we all process the environment exactly the same way.
Right. Point, because we have people who recover from strokes and they're just God for neuroplasticity.
And one
So,
thing I talk to my students about is when you think about our understanding of the brain, it comes from brain scans, and there's a variety of techniques now to scan the brain. And I ask my students how many people have had an MRI or scan of their brain, a CT scan, MRI, and fewer than 10% have had a brain scan.
Hmm.
When you look at this is United States, if you look at other cultures in the world, it's even lower. So our understanding of our brains come from the small number of people that have been scanned, which is not, in my view, a representative sample.
Yeah.
Most fMRI studies that I review in the book that exist across the topics, the number of subjects are tiny. The 20 would be a big sample. So we do not know the entire range of brain variability.
so we need like a human genome project, but for the brain, so we can. And I often a little bit of a digression, but I've been fascinated by the idea that about brain-body interactions, and diet will affect production of some hormones, so that will affect your brain. So I just have this wonderful feeling that we're at the dawn of a phenomenal gain of understanding on how our brains work and looking.
Yes, I think the number of fMRI machines in the United States has increased. And as those technologies get cheaper, we're going to see more what you might think of as special topic science. Like there's a lot of studies now, they get on the news, but they scan dogs' brains. There's fMRI studies of dog cognition. I'm a dog lover, so I'm always reading those and watching the interviews. These kinds of studies wouldn't have been done in the 90s or even the 2000s because it was so expensive to run the machines, to hire the staff.
Yeah.
But with the availability increasing, the student that walks into the lab and says, I want to study what the brain is doing, hearing this kind of joke, these kinds of studies could be done more easily now.
Nice. And I want to acknowledge the Dognition Lab at Yale. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, I watched when my dog passed away, but I watched that a lot for my dog Trumpet. Yep. Oh, go ahead, Jim Bob.
That's an awfully tempting rabbit trail to go down because I have a grand dog, Ginger, and my daughter-in-law has taught Ginger quite a few vocabulary words, just using little buttons that you press there. And
Yes.
I'd really like to know what's going on in Ginger's brain sometimes. But I digress. There was one thing in the book you mentioned that people that with conditions such as Parkinson's or dementia, Alzheimer's, you know, that they show a change in their appreciation of humor.
Yes. Even just healthy aging, somebody who's, past 70, there are brain changes that happen that could also result in noticeable decreases in getting irony, sarcasm, I guess you would say figurative language. But when you look at the conditions that are associated with dementia, Parkinson's in the late stages, Alzheimer's, frontal temporal dementia, here the case studies have shown that with significant brain degeneration, you can observe decreases in the ability to get a joke, so humor appreciation. And a few studies have also linked it to spontaneous production of humor being decreased, which is a very sad kind of finding that this great thing, humor, can't always be appreciated by those who might actually need it and benefit from it the most. So in families, we may notice these changes, and it could actually be a reason to go to the primary care physician about concerns about health.
Could this be a diagnostic tool for the?
In some ways, figurative language has been a diagnostic tool for TBI. Not being able to get a proverb like a stitch in time saves nine. So I do think, yes, that we could find not getting a joke becoming seen as more of a diagnostic tool for neurologists.
This
I
is very
recently-
encouraging. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jim Bob. Go.
Yeah. This is very encouraging for me because I do stand-up comedy. And so if the audience isn't responding, I can just say,
Yes.
guys, you guys really need to see a neurologist as soon as possible because you're not getting my jokes. Sorry, kid.
That was so worth a wait. Okay. So I recently spent a little time with a woman in late stage Alzheimer's, and I was able to witness her go from fairly aware to gone. And I think some of it was the meds too. But there was a day where she was cranky, because we know that this crankiness can come up with Alzheimer's. And I tried to reach her through music. So when earlier in her stages, I managed to use music to get her to her dance recitals when she was young. That was amazing that she became suddenly cognitive, but as a child. The second time when she was cranky, I started playing music from number one, what I thought she would recognize, and humorous. I came up with, first it was the Witch Doctor song. And then I got a little bit of a raise from that. And then Hello Mutta, Hello Fada, got a little more raise from that. And the final one wasn't humorous, but sweet. It was Free to Be You and Me. If you remember that from
Marlo Thomas.
Yeah. Humorous music. It's what I think it's not the humor, but the connection to the song. Am I right?
Yes, music is a hugely emotional stimulus. And there's a great documentary that came out a couple years ago called Alive Inside. And I recommend it to everyone. I showed it to my students, and I really found that they responded so strongly that one of the cases in the video is a man who's in maybe late stage dementia, who's completely incommunicative, and they put on the headphones and play music from his era, like his music he liked. And he wakes up and begins having conversations. And so the purpose of the documentary was to encourage the use of music in these populations of people to try to increase the quality of their lives. So I do think when you're thinking about humor in these situations, what was funny to the person earlier in life might be too cognitively complex to give laughter now.
Mm.
So you might find you can get the person appreciating humor, but different kinds of humor, simple cartoon type situations, but to experiment, try to see what increases the arousal, the awareness of the person, and find the stimuli that's going to bring about the effect, because it's going to probably change over the course of the disease.
Can I share one more and then I promise I'll stop telling stories? I got hired to do it. I'm a clown and I got hired to do a singing telegram for a 99-year-old Air Force pilot. And his assistant told me the day before, he's humming this song about bubbles. I don't know what it is. And so I find Don Ho bubbles. I plan for that. I plan a fake child's Air Force pilot hat. And I bring them 2 choices for hats and I make him a balloon plane. But when I arrive, they say, oh, I don't know if he's going to react to anything. He's having a bad day. And I get in there and his whole face is bruised. He's got a blanket up to here and his oxygen, and he's just out of the room. And I have this little speaker and I put Don Ho up to his ear and I get nothing. And then I make him a balloon plane. I get a little something. I give him a choice between a cowboy hat and a pilot hat, and I get a little more. And then I remember as I was going through his era and thinking about music he might like, I found this other song about bubbles. And I downloaded in the moment, thank goodness for technology, put it up to his ear, and he left the room. He did a jig under that blanket, and he was cognitively in his past, in the dance hall, in the Air Force, back right where he was. We were all crying our eyes out. It was the most beautiful thing to see. And it was like the humor, you could see him reliving. And that was my first experience with any of this, with really understanding how powerful music is and what it does for people. And to see the joy that this person who was out of the room was able to experience from that. And then, of course, which rippled into all of us. So thanks for talking about that, because that is deep in my heart. That day is just so deep in my heart.
That's a great story. I think when you think about music, I feel like it's this underrated part of our lives. I teach a class also on the psychology of art. And when I was preparing a lecture, I was also just shocked when you think about movies and TV shows and visual media, that it's the music that carries a lot of the emotionality and sets up the sort of context. Is this going to be funny? Is this going to be sad? Is this going to be energizing? And so the humor, when you think about humorous music or music that sets us up to be like circuses, that circus music gets you ready to know what to expect.
Yeah.
That when combined with humor, the music can be a powerful increaser of the humorous effect.
Can you go deeper into, and thank you, that's beautiful. I'm really curious about the glucose study, because that is something I've never, ever heard about. I think I know a number of people dealing with diabetes, so I love that.
Yes, it's a series of studies conducted by a lab. I think they may be in Japan with type 2 diabetics. And so I imagine that they start out looking for does humor have any health benefits? And so when you think about type 2 diabetes, what could you measure to show that there's been a change in the person? So I guess the most recent studies have looked at not just blood glucose, but the A1C, which is that how well has your body been managing the glucose over 3 months or so. And the most recent studies show changes in the A1C as well. So this notion that humor is just maybe a temporary, non-significant effect in the body, I think the research is showing that maybe not. Maybe a steady supply of humor paced out over time can really change your body in ways that would be permanent, long term.
And do you work with the antidepressant side of things too, with the people that are depressed and the SSRI studies? Do you work with that?
There haven't been many studies looking at humor and SSRIs. When I think about how you would do that kind of study, it would clearly have to be probably in a hospital setting. Among my student population, we do research studies using university students, and I do know anecdotally that a big proportion of students are taking SSRIs. So that would be an interesting thing to look at. Is there an additive component? The SSRI helps your mood. If you add in humor, you might get just the sum, or you might get an exponential change. We don't know.
Well, and some of it is saying with exercise. They say exercise can replace your SSRI. And I'm not recommending anybody do anything. I'm not a doctor, but could humor also? Because if laughter is exercise, and exercise can help people reduce or manage their symptoms better, then I'm practicing my logic. Then it seems that laughter that has a belly laugh could also have an effect. Do you agree? Do you think? What do you think?
Yes, I think there are studies looking at the immune responses in the context of humor. And so we do know from these studies that humor can modulate and make better the immune response. So the studies were done with people with allergies. So they did scratch allergy tests and before and after experiencing humor. And they did find that the more positive immune response after experiencing humor. So when you think about the effect of exercise on the body, one of the big ones is the reduction of inflammation. And I do think we know more and more now about inflammation as being a contributor to depression and anxiety. I do think there are very few studies looking at this, like immune markers after you experience humor. That would be a great area for new research, because I do think you will find that humor is having this positive benefit in our immune systems.
Wow.
Amazing.
That has a lot of phenomenal. First of all, if you're within the sound of our voices now and you want to fund this research, Dr. Kennison will be happy to help you.
Definitely,
with that.
yes.
Yeah. And I'm also trying to picture a world where, say, someone's having a problem with high blood glucose and say, I don't have any insulin, I've got a clown nose, and there's a medical intervention, I think, is but then we'd have to go to the FDA and get the nose registered as a medical device, so I don't know if that's going to work.
I'm reminded of one of the funny pictures I've seen on the internet of a librarian sitting at a library desk with a giant panda head. I think having these things around your home to remind you of the absurd, I do think that this is a long-term positive health strategy.
Speaking of pictures, let me share this one. I realize people can't hear, but yeah, what you need to do is you need to look up the book Cognitive Science of Humor, Cognitive Neuroscience of Humor. This is the greatest cover of a book that I've ever seen.
I concur 100%.
Where did you find the children and the devices? For those who can't hear it, it's 3 children, looks like they're wearing some type of science fiction 50s era helmets there. Looks like they're undergoing some study. The children
with
all
satellite, they have little satellite tops.
Yeah.
They're adorable. And the headphones on the baby in the middle, of course.
Yeah. And
Well,
the cognitive paradox here is wonderful, but I'm sorry.
The publisher, American Psychological Association books, they basically found it and said, "What do you think?" And I'm like, "It's great." It was all the publishing group.
Job well done. That was
yeah. Agreed.
What projects are you working on now that you'd like to talk about?
That's a good question. It's summer. It's a great time to be, planning for the fall lineup. But I think one study that I've been percolating on is it was really inspired by my class. So many students are taking the class, and across the class, it occurred, they say, I didn't grow up watching humor. There's an assignment to write about your favorite comedian, and students will say, I don't have one. And I'm like, how did you get in this class? But the idea that families have maybe a culture of humor that can be unique. So this summer, for the first time, I asked students to write about sarcasm. And half the class says that their family dissuaded them from using sarcasm. It was a bad thing. And half of the students tend to say, we use it all the time. We are a sarcastic family. So that's my next idea for a study, to be looking at quantifying, measuring the humor culture in families.
Speaking of family humor, because this came up last night, because I was having a Zoom call with my grandson and my son there. My grandson has noticed that the Williams side of the family, especially his father, his uncles, his grandfather, are making jokes all the time and being silly. Okay, but he notices his other grandparents, they're not as silly. Okay, they have fun, they enjoy comedies and all like that, but don't seem to be disposed. That's not their. The first rule of thumb in our family has always been laughter. We would, when I was around the dinner table with my sons, we would get into pun contests, and the contest wasn't finished until my youngest son had milk shooting out of his nose. That's when we knew that we had a successful one. So my 8-year-old grandson, he does this routine, and it's hysterical. And he goes to his dad, I guess we have another Williams family classic. Boom. I said, yes, that's my grandson. No DNA test necessary. He gets it. He knows how we roll. And he got this by observation. That he said, because he just noticed that things were different.
Right.
There.
In my own family, I think looking back, in college, I think I discovered my appreciation of humor. It was an important thing to me to be funny, to seek out jokes. And it didn't occur to me until college that not everyone does that. And so then I look back on my life, and I remember my dad had a notebook where he was collecting jokes he wrote. Like, he was trying to write jokes, and he did appreciate funny movies. But in contrast, my mother, I'm not sure she ever told a single joke in her life. And if you said, hey, would you like to come listen to some jokes? She would probably say, no, thank you. And in my sibling group, my brother and I have a very similar sense of humor, and my sister does not. She's more like my mom. So I've been fascinated with this idea of the genetics of humor. And in the book, there's a review of a few studies that do suggest that this humor appreciation can be genetic. But the studies so far have been done with rats. But I tell my students, but if you look at professionals, there are these funny families, right? You've got generations of people working in the entertainment field who you can objectively say, yeah, they're all funny. So we need to do more of the studies looking at genetic profiles and how easy are you to laugh, or do you seek out humor? Is humor a part of your daily life?
I remember Josh Mostel, son of Zero Mostel, said if somebody visited the house, Josh and his brothers, of course his father too, would always be in the competition to see who could make the company laugh first and hardest. That's how they rolled. Amazing. All right. Also, I must point out that you did a series of videos on your YouTube channel that are fascinating. And the one you mentioned rats and studying rats, about how rats are ticklish and you can actually measure response.
Yeah, I was wanting to go back to the rats because I think people would say, how do you expose rats to humor? And those studies actually looked at tickling. So the caretaker tickles the rat, and then they can measure the vocalizations that is comparable to human laughter. And so what they found was that if the rat had been part of the family tree, grandpa was a big laugher, vocalizer, and granddad and the parents were, then these offspring rats laughed more than other rats who descended from lines that did not vocalize as much during tickling. So that's where you get that inference that how much do you laugh during this tickling is largely maybe genetic. And
I really want to title this podcast Shelia Kennison and the Neuroscience of Tickling Rats. Can I do that? It's not your study, but
Right. No, but it's one of my favorite lines of research that when I went back to look at recent publications, I think the literature has accepted that finding. Oh, yes, of course. The vocalization during tickling is contributed to by genes. But when we think about humans, we need to do studies like that to look at which genes, which set of genes might be related to that. And it's probably related to things like positive effect generally, optimism, hope, having a sunny outlook on life, optimism versus pessimism. That these are things that stem first from our biology.
would it be inappropriate to title this? I'm going to cut this out, but would it be inappropriate to title this The Neuroscience of Tickling Rats under your name?
I don't think that's all it is. The rats is a sliver
Right.
of the
I think
literature.
it's going to cause a little interest. That's where I'm at. And we've
Yeah.
had a number of people reference that particular study in the conference. We were at this in Denver and a couple of the speakers there. So I think it's appropriate in terms of the science of humor. And I'd love to attach it to your name because I just think, first of all, you're doing some of the same work,
Yeah.
just right? Would that be correct?
Sure. And I do think when I teach my class, the students have a hard time really understanding that humans are just another animal and we share so much with other species. So I don't know if you've seen these clips that are out there of orangutans watching a magic trick. The orangutan is in the cage and the person doing the magic trick is showing the thing disappear and the orangutan reacts like we would, like mouth is open,
Yes.
they're shocked. And we're so similar with laughing expressions, smiling expressions. I just forwarded a new TikTok to a friend showing a dog with a purple and a green alligator, and the dog at the end of it smiles really big.
Yeah.
Those behaviors that we think of as purely human, it's just not the case. We share this sort of hardwiring foundation with other mammals in particular.
I was just teaching yoga like 2 weeks ago, and my friend's dog mom was out of town. So the dog was with us during yoga. And we went on our backs to do dead bug, where your paws up and moving your arms and legs. And the dog joined us. It was hilarious.
You should get it
Right on
video.
cue. Yes. Yeah, it's on my YouTube
TikTok.
channel.
It's amazing what dogs can do in other species. You mentioned the dog vocabulary buttons, but there's a very impressive literature showing that dogs can understand simple sentence syntax.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we need more of these studies to see what is the limit to what they can do.
Have you heard of
Yeah.
the book Lessons in Chemistry?
No.
Okay, it's okay. We may have to change the name of this. I'll look it up later. I believe it was Brenda Gamis. Lessons in Chemistry is now a Netflix series, not Netflix, Apple Plus series. Okay, it's a story about a woman in the 1960s experiencing discrimination and in the workplace. She's an organic chemist, but can't be taken seriously. Goes through some tragedy. Anyway, I won't. No more spoiler alerts. One of the characters in the book is a dog named 630. Dog 630 is a washed out of bomb sniffing school and attached himself to to Elizabeth Zott, the heroine of the story. And Elizabeth Zott teaches the dog various words, and the dog actually becomes her lab assistant, learning to switch equipment on and off and things like that. All right. So you read this and you go, oh, this can't happen. They had I listened to the audiobook. At the end of the audiobook, they had an interview with Brenda Gamis, and she said the dog was the character of 630 was modeled after a dog that she owned named Friday. And so that Friday had a phenomenal vocabulary. And the family traveled, they ended up in Germany. It was a long-term assignment, something like that. And Friday picked up German. Okay. She was kidding around with the dog one day. She looked at it and she told the dog to sit in German. She goes, Freitag, whatever. And the dog sits, and she was stunned because one, she didn't know that the dog had recognized Freitag as his name, right? And didn't know that the dog knew that the German word for sit meant sit. And the dog gave her this quizzical look like, all dogs are multilingual. Like, So I think there's, long story short there. Yeah, I think there's a lot more going on in dog brains than we understand and appreciate. And it's, of course, anecdotal, right? So many people have strong relationships and bond where the dog seems to know what they're thinking and responds.
Service dogs.
Yeah.
Right.
I had Trumpet trained to sign language. So it didn't didn't matter what language I spoke. I could speak gibberish and he'd still follow the sign language. Do you want to chime in there, Shelia?
There is a very recent study from the fMRI literature showing that dogs are much more sensitive to our intonation than we would think. In the study, I think they compared a message, something that was said that was consistent with the intonation versus inconsistent. When you say sit, that has a certain tone, but if you were to say that word without a different tone, sit, like a question, that dogs are actually sensitive to a mismatch between the meaning and the intonation meaning. So the two sources of meaning. So it's wow, they're really tuned to our emotional sounds and also the vocabulary. Like, what does that utterance mean?
You get that little head tilt. What?
Yeah.
Right.
So, Jim Bob, is it time for your? Oh, go ahead, Sheila. I don't want to interrupt you.
No, I wasn't saying.
Yeah, I want to ask my favorite question here. And based on your studies and research, and what do you want people to remember on Thursday about humor?
I think that the thing to remember on Thursday is that this is a very powerful, untapped source of, I think, good health or stabilizing health. So there's one intervention that's so easy that we could all do it if we decided to, and it's called the 3 funny things intervention. You may have heard of this.
Tell us more.
It's something you could do daily or you could decide to do it weekly, but it's simple. Come up with 3 funny things from the past week and to write them down. I guess you could speak them into a recording device. But studies have shown that doing this task, just thinking of the 3 things that were funny this week, is related to long term increases in mood, more optimism, more hope. And it doesn't take that long, right? A few minutes each day to think about, oh, that funny picture I saw on the internet, that funny thing somebody I knew said, or a movie I watched, that scene from a funny movie. That if you just replay these, go out and seek them out and think about them briefly, that it's going to be effective in having a boost in your mood over the long term. So
Yeah, long term meaning like the rest of your life.
yes, I guess the idea, if you keep doing it, you're going to keep finding the benefit. So I think daily or weekly humor prescriptions, that would be what I would recommend to everybody.
Oh, fantastic.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So if someone wants to get in contact with you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
My university email is Googleable. So it's OK State is Oklahoma State University. The other OSU, there's 2 others that we won't name.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely get a lot of email from people from all over the world. So I welcome anybody reaching out. That would be great.
Love this. Thank you. This is so fun today. I love the science of all this.
It was fun. Thanks.
This has been Laughbox, the official podcast of the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor. I'm Jim Bob Williams.
And I'm Katie B.
And we want to thank our special guest, Dr. Shelia Kennison, for talking about the cognitive neuroscience of humor.
Yay!
Thanks so much. It's been a thrill.
Thank you for joining us for episode 132 with Jim Bob Williams, Katie B, and Shelia Kennison. Thank you very much.
Laughbox is a production of the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor. Visit us online at www.aath.org. Follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Music by Gary Rubio. For more information, www.garyrubiomusic.com.